and her friends and her loved ones and her kinfolk and Aunt Sally and Uncle Joe.
There's a pastor in Arkansas. His name is Bob Joyce. He leads a small congregation at the Household of Faith Church in Benton. He sings gospel hymns. He preaches sermons. He lives quietly, humbly, exactly the way you'd expect a small-town pastor to live. Except for one problem. He looks exactly like Elvis Presley. Not kind of like Elvis. Not, oh, there's a resemblance like Elvis, exactly like Elvis. The same facial structure, the same jawline, the same distinctive curl of the upper lip that made Elvis iconic, the same piercing eyes, the same nose, the same cheekbones, even the same subtle expressions, the way his mouth moves when he talks, the way his face shifts when he sings. And when he sings, that's when it gets impossible to ignore. Because Bob Joyce doesn't just look like Elvis, he sounds like him too. Go listen to him sing gospel music. Go find one of the videos that millions of people have already watched. Listen to the vocal tone, the phrasing, the emotional depth, the way he breathes between lines. It's not similar. It's identical. That same rich, trembling quality that made Elvis's voice legendary. That same ability to pour soul into every single word. Now you might be thinking, okay, so there's a guy who looks like Elvis and sounds like Elvis. Coincidences happen. The world is full of celebrity lookalikes. Elvis impersonators are everywhere. Except Bob Joyce isn't an impersonator. He's not trying to look like Elvis. He's not performing in a Vegas tribute show wearing a white jumpsuit and fake sideburns. He's a pastor, leading a church, living a completely separate life that, on the surface, has absolutely nothing to do with Elvis Presley. So let's ask the uncomfortable question nobody wants to say out loud. What are the odds? What are the actual statistical odds that someone with Bob Joyce's exact facial structure, vocal tone, mannerisms, and physical presence just happens to exist? And not just exist anywhere, but in Arkansas, right in Elvis's home region. And not just existing, but singing gospel music, the exact genre Elvis was most passionate about throughout his entire life. Because Elvis loved gospel, that's not speculation, that's documented fact. He won 3 Grammy Awards in his lifetime. All 3 were for gospel music, not for Hound Dog, not for Jailhouse Rock, for gospel. He recorded multiple gospel albums. He talked constantly about how gospel was the music that moved him most deeply, the music that felt most true to who he really was. And here's Bob Joyce, living quietly in Arkansas, singing gospel music in a small church, looking and sounding exactly like the most famous man in American history. Let's talk about Joyce's background for a second. Or more accurately, let's talk about what we don't know about his background. Because for someone who's become the center of one of the biggest conspiracy theories on the internet, Bob Joyce's past is strangely empty. There aren't detailed records of his early life. There aren't childhood photos being circulated. There aren't old friends coming forward with stories about growing up with Bob Joyce before he became a pastor. It's like he appeared, just showed up in Arkansas, started preaching, started singing, and built a quiet life while looking exactly like Elvis Presley. Now Joyce has been asked about the resemblance. Of course he has. When you look that much like the most recognizable face in music history, people are going to ask questions. And his response? He deflects. He pivots to faith. He offers vague statements about how he's just a servant of God doing his work. But here's what he's never done. He's never definitively, aggressively, unambiguously denied being Elvis Presley. Think about that for a second. If you were just some random person who happened to look like Elvis, and millions of people online were convinced you were secretly Elvis living under a new identity, wouldn't you shut that down? Wouldn't you be frustrated, annoyed, adamant about setting the record straight? Wouldn't you provide documentation, proof, anything to stop the constant speculation? Bob Joyce doesn't do that. He acknowledges the resemblance with a kind of amused humility. He shrugs it off. He continues preaching and singing and living his life while the entire internet dissects every frame of video, every photo, every sermon looking for proof. And the more you look, the harder it becomes to dismiss. The facial recognition analyses, granted, most of them are informal, done by enthusiasts rather than forensic experts, but they consistently show that Bob Joyce's bone structure matches Elvis's with a degree of accuracy that shouldn't be possible between 2 unrelated people. The distance between his eyes, the shape of his skull, the proportions of his features, they align. The voice comparisons are even more damning. When you layer Bob Joyce singing gospel over Elvis singing gospel, the match is eerie. Not similar, not reminiscent. Nearly identical in tone, pitch control, vibrato, emotional delivery. And then there are the mannerisms, the way Joyce holds himself when he sings, the slight movement of his hands, the tilt of his head, the way he closes his eyes during emotional moments. These aren't things you can fake. These aren't things an impersonator would even think to replicate because they're so subtle, so natural. But they're Elvis's mannerisms, unmistakably. So here we are, staring at a pastor in Arkansas who looks like Elvis, sounds like Elvis, moves like Elvis, sings the music Elvis loved most, and lives exactly the kind of quiet, faith-centered life that Elvis always said he wanted. And the question hanging in the air, the question millions of people are asking, the question that won't go away no matter how much it gets dismissed as conspiracy theory nonsense is this. What if it's not a coincidence? What if Bob Joyce is exactly who people think he is? What if Elvis Presley didn't die in 1977? What if he finally found a way to escape, to disappear, to become someone else? Someone anonymous, someone free, someone who could sing gospel music in a small church without the weight of being the king of rock and roll crushing him every single day. Because if that's true, if there's even a possibility that's true, then everything we've been told about August 16, 1977 is a lie. And we need to talk about that day. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on his bathroom floor at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart attack. The world mourned. Graceland became a shrine, and the king of rock and roll was gone. Except nothing about that day actually makes sense. Let's start with the most basic question. Why was Elvis found alone? This was a man who lived at Graceland surrounded by people. Staff, security, friends, family members, hangers-on. Graceland was never empty. Elvis was never truly alone. He had people watching him, checking on him, managing his schedule, bringing him food, handling his medication. The idea that he would be in that bathroom long enough to die without anyone noticing, without anyone checking on him, without anyone being concerned, it defies the reality of how he lived. But that's the official story. He was alone, he collapsed, he died. Nobody knew until it was too late. Convenient, isn't it? Now let's talk about the autopsy. Or more accurately, let's talk about the autopsies, plural. Because there wasn't just one autopsy report. There were multiple versions, and they contradicted each other. The initial report suggested one cause of death. Later reports suggested others. Drug overdose was whispered about but never officially confirmed in the way you'd expect for someone whose prescription drug use was well documented. The toxicology reports were murky, incomplete, confusing. And here's the part that should make everyone suspicious. Elvis's full autopsy findings were sealed, locked away, hidden from public view, and they're scheduled to remain sealed until 2027, 50 years after his death. Why? If Elvis died of natural causes, if it was just a tragic heart attack, if there was nothing suspicious or unusual about his death, why seal the records? Why hide the medical findings for half a century? What could possibly be in those documents that the public can't know for 50 years? Unless there's something in there that doesn't match the official story. Then there's the funeral, the closed casket. Elvis Presley was the most famous face in the world. Millions of people wanted to see him one last time. And yet, the casket was closed. The explanation given was that the family wanted privacy, that they wanted to preserve his dignity, that it was too painful to have him on display. But people saw him, selected people, family, close friends, certain insiders, and some of them said things that raised eyebrows. Some of them commented that he didn't look quite right, that something seemed off, that the body in the casket didn't look exactly like Elvis. Now you could attribute that to death, to embalming, to the natural changes that happen to a body. Or you could ask, what if it wasn't him? And then there's the tombstone. Elvis Presley's tombstone, the permanent marker of his final resting place, the monument that millions of people visit every single year. His name is spelled wrong. His middle name on the tombstone reads Aaron, 2 A's, but Elvis's birth certificate, his legal documents, everything official about his identity spelled his middle name Aaron. 1A Elvis himself used Aaron throughout his life. It's how he signed documents. It's his legal name. So why is his tombstone wrong? Why would the family, the estate, the people responsible for memorializing him get his own name incorrect on the most important marker of his death. Some people say it was a mistake, just an error, a simple oversight during an emotional, chaotic time. But this wasn't some random funeral for a random person. This was Elvis Presley. Every detail should have been scrutinized. Every word, every letter, every inscription should have been checked and double-checked and verified. And they got his name wrong. Or did they get it wrong on purpose? Is that tombstone marking the grave of someone who isn't actually Elvis Aaron Presley? Let's talk about motive. Because if Elvis faked his death, if he orchestrated an escape, there had to be a reason. And the reason isn't hard to find. Elvis was suffocating. By 1977, fame had destroyed him. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a product, a brand, a commodity that everyone wanted a piece of. He couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. He couldn't have a private life. He couldn't walk down a street, eat at a restaurant, exist in public without causing chaos. He was trapped in Graceland, trapped in his own fame, trapped in a life that was killing him slowly, physically, mentally, emotionally. And he knew it. Elvis talked about it. He talked about wanting peace. He talked about wanting to disappear. He talked about gospel music being the only thing that still felt real to him. He talked about faith, about God, about finding meaning beyond the screaming crowds and the Vegas performances and the constant pressure to be Elvis Presley. What if he meant it? What if he wasn't just venting or dreaming or speaking hypothetically? What if he was planning? Because here's what we know about Elvis in his final years. He was paranoid. He was worried about threats. He was convinced people were after him, fans who'd become obsessive, criminals who saw him as a target, even government entities he believed were watching him. He had connections, serious connections, law enforcement connections. He had that famous meeting with President Nixon where he got a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He had relationships with people in powerful positions, people who could help someone disappear if they needed to. And he had money, enormous amounts of money. Enough money to fund a new identity, a new life, a complete disappearance. So what if that's exactly what he did? What if August 16, 1977 wasn't the day Elvis died? What if it was the day Elvis Presley ceased to exist so that someone else could finally start living? Think about the timeline. Elvis dies in August 1977. His funeral happens quickly. The casket is closed. The autopsy is sealed. The burial is rushed. And within a relatively short window after that, Bob Joyce appears in Arkansas. A man who looks exactly like Elvis, who sounds exactly like Elvis, who sings gospel music, the music Elvis loved most, who lives quietly, humbly, anonymously, who found exactly the kind of peace and faith-centered existence that Elvis always said he wanted. Bob Joyce isn't trying to be Elvis. He's not impersonating him. He's not cashing in on the resemblance or seeking attention or building a career off the comparison. He's just living, preaching, singing gospel, doing exactly what Elvis Presley said he wished he could do if he ever got free. And that's the most compelling evidence of all. Because if this were just some random guy who happened to look like Elvis, he'd be capitalizing on it. He'd be making money off it. He'd be leaning into the comparison. But Bob Joyce doesn't do that. He deflects. He stays humble. He keeps living his quiet pastoral life while the entire world speculates about who he really is. Almost like he's protecting something. Almost like he's hiding in plain sight. Almost like he's exactly who people think he is. And he can't admit it because the moment he does, everything collapses. Let's get specific, because this isn't just about a guy who vaguely resembles Elvis. This is about evidence that keeps stacking up piece by piece, until dismissing it starts to feel willfully ignorant. Start with the voice. That's where most people get hooked on this theory, because you can dismiss a physical resemblance. You can say someone just happens to have similar features. Coincidences exist. Genetics are weird. People look like other people sometimes. But the voice, that's different. That's nearly impossible to replicate. Go listen to Bob Joyce sing "How Great Thou Art." That's one of Elvis's most famous gospel performances. It's the song that won him a Grammy. It's the song that showcases everything incredible about his voice. The power, the control, the emotional vulnerability, the way he could make you feel every single word. Now listen to Bob Joyce sing it. It's the same voice, not similar, not reminiscent. the same vocal quality, the same trembling vibrato, the same way of holding notes, the same emotional phrasing, the same slight rasp on certain words, the same breathing patterns between lines. Professional vocal analysts have pointed out that voice is like a fingerprint. Everyone's vocal cords are unique. The way sound resonates through your specific bone structure, the shape of your throat, the mechanics of your breathing. These things create a signature that's extraordinarily difficult to fake. And Bob Joyce's vocal signature matches Elvis Presley's. When he sings gospel, which is what he does most, the resemblance becomes undeniable. It's not just that he sounds like Elvis, it's that he sings with the exact same technique Elvis used. The same placement, the same control, the same instinctive musical choices. Those aren't things you learn, those aren't things you can study and copy. Those are embedded in who you are as a singer. They're muscle memory. They're decades of vocal development creating a specific, unique sound. Bob Joyce has Elvis's sound. Now let's talk about the face, because people have done more than just eyeball the resemblance. They've analyzed it, frame by frame, measurement by measurement. Facial recognition technology works by mapping specific points on a face. The distance between eyes, the width of the nose, the shape of the jawline, the proportions of the entire facial structure. These measurements create a unique biometric profile. Multiple people have run Bob Joyce's face through comparison analyses against Elvis's documented photos, and the matches are extraordinary. The bone structure aligns. The facial proportions align. Even accounting for aging, weight changes, and decades of difference, the underlying architecture of the face is the same. Now, are these analyses done by official forensic experts with courtroom-level precision? No. Most of them are done by enthusiasts, by people online who are trying to prove or disprove the theory. But the consistency of the results is what matters. It's not one person finding one similarity. It's multiple independent analyses all reaching the same conclusion. These faces match. And it's not just the measurements, it's the expressions, the way Bob Joyce's face moves when he talks, the subtle quirks that are impossible to fake because they're unconscious. Elvis had a very specific way his upper lip would curl slightly when he smiled. Bob Joyce does the same thing. Elvis had a particular look in his eyes when he was singing something emotional, a kind of intense, distant focus. Bob Joyce has that exact same look. Elvis had certain hand gestures he'd use naturally when he was speaking or performing. Bob Joyce uses those same gestures. These aren't things you rehearse. These aren't things an impersonator would even know to replicate because they're so small, so natural, so embedded in how a person exists in their body. But Bob Joyce has them, all of them. Then there's his behavior, the way he responds when people ask him about the resemblance. Because if you were just some random guy who happened to look like Elvis, you'd have a definitive answer ready. You'd be tired of the question. You'd shut it down immediately and move on. You'd probably be annoyed that people couldn't see you for who you actually are instead of constantly comparing you to someone else. Bob Joyce doesn't do that. When asked directly if he's Elvis, he gives answers that are carefully worded, deflective, almost playful. He'll say things like, "I'm just a man trying to serve the Lord," or "I'm nobody special, just a pastor doing God's work." He redirects to faith. He sidesteps the question. But he never says, "No, I'm not Elvis Presley. That's ridiculous. Here's my birth certificate. Here are photos of me as a child. Here's documentation of my entire life proving I'm Bob Joyce and I've always been Bob Joyce." Why not? Why not definitively, aggressively shut down the theory if it's false? Unless it's not false. Unless he can't shut it down because doing so would require providing evidence that doesn't exist. Or worse, providing evidence that would expose the truth. People who have met Bob Joyce in person talk about something they can't quite explain. A presence, a familiarity, a sense that there's more to him than what he's showing. They describe feeling like they're meeting someone they already know, even if they've never seen him before. That's not something you can fake. That's not charisma or charm or good pastoral energy. That's something deeper. Something that suggests this person carries a history, an identity, a lifetime of experiences that don't match the simple story of a small-town Arkansas pastor. And then there's the timeline. Bob Joyce's documented history conveniently begins around the time Elvis died. There's no robust public record of Bob Joyce before the late 70s. No childhood stories being shared by old classmates. No early ministry work that's well documented and verifiable. It's like he appeared, like someone created Bob Joyce as an identity and stepped into it fully formed. Now, believers in this theory have gone even deeper. They've compared Elvis's known health issues with Bob Joyce's apparent physical condition. They've noted that Bob Joyce is the correct age. If Elvis had lived, he'd be in his late 80s now, which matches Joyce's apparent age. They've tracked Joyce's accent, his speech patterns, his cultural references, looking for traces of Elvis beneath the surface. And they keep finding them. Little things, a phrase Elvis used to say that Bob Joyce says in sermons, a particular way of pronouncing certain words that matches Elvis's Memphis accent, references to experiences or perspectives that seem oddly specific for someone who supposedly lived a quiet pastoral life. Are these proof? Not individually. Any one of these things could be coincidence. Any single piece of evidence could be explained away. But all of them together, all of these things happening in the same person, the voice, the face, the mannerisms, the timeline, the behavior, the lack of documentation, the refusal to definitively deny the connection. How many coincidences can stack up before they stop being coincidences? How much evidence has to accumulate before you start asking the question seriously? What if Bob Joyce really is Elvis Presley? What if this entire time, while millions of people visit Graceland and mourn at his grave and celebrate his legacy, Elvis has been alive, singing gospel music in a small church, living the peaceful, faithful life he always said he wanted, finally free from the fame that was destroying him? What if the greatest disappearing act in history wasn't a magic trick? What if it was a man desperate enough to die on paper so he could finally live in reality? Because if that's true, then everything changes. The estate, the legacy, Graceland, the entire mythology we've built around Elvis's death, all of it collapses. And maybe that's why nobody with power wants to investigate too closely, because the truth might be too expensive to admit. Here's the part that makes this theory truly dangerous to certain people. If Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley, then someone has been lying to the world for nearly 50 years. And that lie has made people very, very rich. Let's talk about what's at stake here, because this isn't just about whether Elvis is alive or dead. This is about a multi-million-dollar empire built entirely on his death. Graceland, Elvis Presley Enterprises, the licensing deals, the merchandise, the tour, the tribute shows, the museums, the entire cottage industry that exists because Elvis Presley died tragically at 42 and became a legend frozen in time. All of that depends on one essential fact: Elvis is dead. If he's not dead, if he's been alive this entire time living as Bob Joyce, then Graceland isn't a memorial, it's a fraud. The grave that millions of people visit every year, crying, mourning, leaving flowers and teddy bears, it's empty. Or worse, it's occupied by someone else entirely while tourists pay money to grieve a man who's alive. The estate that Priscilla Presley controlled for decades, that Lisa Marie inherited, that Riley Keough now manages, it's all been operating under false pretenses. Every dollar earned, every business decision made, every licensing agreement signed, all of it based on the foundational claim that Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. If that claim is false, the legal ramifications are catastrophic. We're talking fraud on a massive scale. We're talking inheritance disputes that would tear through courts for years. We're talking about people who have profited enormously from Elvis's death, suddenly facing accusations of participating in or perpetuating a hoax. Do you really think the people who benefit from Elvis being dead want anyone proving he's alive? This is why the Bob Joyce theory gets dismissed so aggressively. This is why it's labeled conspiracy nonsense, why it's mocked and ridiculed, why serious journalists won't touch it. Because if they investigate and find evidence, if they start asking uncomfortable questions, if they poke too hard at the official narrative, the entire Presley empire could crumble. So it's easier to laugh it off, easier to call the believers crazy, easier to ignore the mounting evidence and dismiss millions of people as delusional fans who can't accept that their idol died. But let's think about motive from Elvis's perspective. Why would he fake his death? What would drive someone to do something that extreme? The answer is painfully simple. He was dying anyway. Maybe not physically, though his health was terrible by 1977, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Fame was killing him. The constant surveillance, the inability to be human, the pressure to always be Elvis Presley, the loneliness of being the most famous person on earth while feeling completely alone. He talked about it constantly in his final years. He talked about wanting peace. He talked about wishing he could be anonymous. He talked about gospel music being the only thing that still felt pure, still felt real, still connected him to something beyond the circus his life had become. He talked about God, about faith, about finding meaning, about wanting to serve something bigger than himself without the weight of celebrity crushing him. And what's Bob Joyce doing? He's living exactly that life, preaching in a small church, singing gospel music for congregations of regular people, serving God quietly, humbly, without cameras or screaming fans or bodyguards or any of the machinery of fame. If you wanted to design the perfect life for Elvis to disappear into, this would be it. Not hiding in isolation on some remote island, not living under a fake name in witness protection, but hiding in plain sight as a pastor, doing the work he always said mattered most, singing the music he always loved deepest, finally free. And here's the thing that makes it believable. Elvis had the resources to pull it off. He had money. He had connections in law enforcement and government. He had people loyal enough to help him disappear. He had motivation strong enough to make the sacrifice worth it. And the sacrifice would have been enormous. Walking away from his daughter, Lisa Marie. Walking away from his identity, his legacy, his fame. Never being able to acknowledge who he was again. Living every single day knowing the world thinks you're dead, knowing your family is mourning you, knowing you can never go back. That's not a decision someone makes lightly, but it's a decision someone makes when the alternative is worse. When staying alive as Elvis Presley means actual death, if not physical, then complete destruction of self. So maybe he chose a different kind of death. The death of Elvis Presley, the icon, so that the man underneath could finally breathe. Now, does the estate want this theory proven true? Absolutely not. Does Graceland benefit from people believing Elvis might be alive? Actually, yes, because mystery sells, conspiracy keeps people interested. The Bob Joyce theory keeps Elvis relevant, keeps people talking, keeps them visiting Graceland, keeps them buying merchandise. As long as it stays a theory, as long as it's never definitively proven, as long as Bob Joyce never admits it and nobody forces the issue legally, the mystery is profitable. But the moment it becomes fact, the moment someone proves Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley, that's when everything collapses. That's when the lawsuits start. That's when the criminal investigations begin. That's when 50 years of carefully constructed narrative disintegrates. So they let the theory exist. They let people speculate. They let YouTube videos accumulate millions of views. They let believers gather evidence and analyze voices and compare faces. Because as long as it stays in the realm of conspiracy, it's harmless. It might even be helpful. But they'll never let it be proven, because proof destroys the empire. And that's what makes this whole thing so haunting. We're staring at what might be the truth. Bob Joyce standing there, singing gospel, looking and sounding exactly like Elvis, and we can't touch it. We can't force the answer. We can't demand DNA tests or official investigations because the people with the power to do that have every incentive not to. So Bob Joyce keeps preaching. Graceland keeps selling tickets. The estate keeps profiting. And millions of people keep wondering if the man they're watching on grainy church videos is the king of rock and roll, finally at peace, finally free. Maybe he is. Maybe he got exactly what he wanted. A quiet life singing gospel music, anonymous and unknown, finally able to just be human. Or maybe we're all seeing what we desperately want to see. A ghost, a hope, a fantasy that our hero didn't die young and tragic but escaped and found happiness. Either way, the question won't die, because the evidence won't stop stacking up. And Bob Joyce, he just keeps singing. If you believe Bob Joyce deserves real investigation, drop a comment right now. If this theory is bigger than anyone admits, share this before it gets buried. Hit subscribe for more hidden truths about Elvis, the Presley estate, and the mysteries they don't want solved. The question isn't going away, and maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe someone doesn't want it answered.